Humans are always the weakest link and the biggest target as a result, whether it's phishing emails, it's impersonation, it's credential theft.
Do it nice or do it twice. Taking your time to make sure it's done correctly, otherwise you end up having to backtrack and fix the mistakes that you made by prioritizing speed rather than quality.
No human can come close to matching the superb data ingestion and analytical capabilities that AI can provide us with today.
If we use, I guess, our visual cue and audio cues for authentication, where do we go from here if that can actually be faked?
Just interjecting and asking a question that potentially derails the conversation, but only me and you would know in conversation, immediately tests the authenticity.
What does the future look like for CloudGuard?
We will continue to work with amazing people that want to also contribute to this journey that we are on.
So, Matt, looking back, what were the key inflection points that drove your career that ultimately led you to founding CloudGuard?
Many and varied, Ruben. I'd say met some great people along the way, worked in IT pretty much, most of my professional career at least. Through that IT career, security has been one of the central themes and certainly the area that has received more latterly the most focus, and the area I certainly felt with the people around me that we can make the biggest difference in. And that has exponentially changed in the last 6 or 7 years, I'd say. So when we founded CloudGuard between Jav and myself, it was from a shared vision and belief that we could create something and something that was needed by particularly smaller businesses to offer them better protection. It wasn't a product approach at all. It was security as a service, as an outcome. It's needed more now than it's ever been needed. So that has infused, that has absolutely generated much more belief in what we're doing and the longer term vision and mission.
Very nice, very nice. I'm sure you must have encountered some challenges along the way. So was there anything that, I guess, any principles that you refused to compromise on whilst going through this journey that ultimately led for it to take longer than it could have done if you had taken quote unquote shortcuts?
So if I can take you back and give you the context of the starting position, we were seeing sort of 2015, 2016 organizations experience cyber activity, attacks, threats and risks from fairly rudimentary based attacks, largely volumetric at the time, but they became much more sophisticated very quickly. And the products and the services that we could offer, particularly smaller customers, particularly as a big IT service provider on a shared platform, and people were obviously accelerating multi-cloud, public cloud type scenarios and hybrid environments, that just complicated the landscape even further. And we knew that we had to encompass everything because it was just weakest link type of problem that customers were facing. Humans are always the weakest link as well, and the biggest target as a result, whether it's phishing emails, it's impersonation, it's credential theft, whatever that is, because they're also the hardest, particularly today, the hardest elements to protect. So for us, it was about not compromising on our learnings. So as we onboarded customers, and many people have said to us, you should have grown CloudGuard much, much faster. The answer to that question is, I totally agree with you, but we would not have been able to do what we've done in terms of automation first and take a completely different approach had we compromised on the principle of we've got to learn from each customer that's coming on and build that learning in for the benefit of all customers and particularly the future customers.
Interesting. Makes me think of a saying that I heard before, which is do it nice or do it twice. So taking your time to make sure it's done correctly, otherwise you end up having to backtrack and fix the mistakes that you made by prioritizing speed rather than quality.
Absolutely. I mean, it's as you say, it's that old adage. I think but back in my school days when you're doing the carpentry or what have you, or metal, and they say measure twice, cut once. It is that philosophy to say you've got to get those foundations right. We can't go back if we scale the business out, the volumetrics of the attacks that are occurring and the sophistication of them. We can't then retrospectively solve the problems we've created. And there's a lot of technical debt in a lot of security service providers.
Technical debt, that's something that we'll definitely come on to for sure. Many security vendors claim to be AI enabled or kind of prioritize AI. Are there any red flags when you're looking at competitors that kind of scream out as actually this is just an LLM wrapped up with clever marketing to make it seem like it's something more than it actually is? Because obviously you guys are automation first.
And it's actually really difficult to demonstrate our philosophy and our approach to automation because it takes place so quickly. And you end up slowing it down, creating demo environments. What I would say to any customer, and the marketing is very, very powerful in lots of businesses, particularly the bigger the budget in the Marcoms area. Ask the questions you want to ask of the technology, whether it's large language model, large action model, AI, agentic AI, agent to agent, whatever it might be. Ask your questions. Don't accept the demo, because that's exactly what that's been set up to curate and deliver, as a representation. Say, can it solve this problem? Demonstrate it. See the evidence in the service to it. Really challenge it with what challenges you're going to have as a business, are having as a business, because that's the way to understand if that solution, if that service, if that product can actually do what it needs to do inside your business. We're seeing a lot of customers say, look, I bought into this product, but actually the landscape has evolved or it's unable to do the following features, and therefore it's created exposure gaps that we've now got to address potentially, with other solutions.
Interesting. A question for you as well around automation. Where would you say that automation is outperforming humans?
Undoubtedly within the analytical sphere, right? So no human can come close to matching the superb data ingestion and analytical capabilities that AI, machine learning, ultimately can provide us with today. What we've got to be careful about is the governance around understanding the trends from that, particularly when it's AI related. So what we are finding with AI is quite subjective and inconsistent in terms of understanding if it is AI or AI-led attacks. If it is AI to human, and particularly human to AI, our ability from a human perspective to identify AI-generated content that's getting super accurate now and super sophisticated is actually really quite poor. Sort of 25% accuracy territory on some of them. And we're seeing, various stats now where people actually believe the agentic version of a deepfake, 7-8%, is more reflective compared to the human. So we're getting to the point where humans can be deceived quite readily. What we need to focus on is, where our defense strategy needs to improve the most against these attack vectors, because for sure, you'll ask the question, is the attack AI, generative AI use, large language model use, more effective than defense right now? And the answer is yes, absolutely.
It's a very sobering thought.
It is, but it's also an opportunity that we need to absolutely get behind to say, okay, how do we solve this problem, right? What are the problems that customers are experiencing? That's part of the reason we verticalized our strategy and we focused on specific business needs within those verticals, understanding how those threats are evolving, understanding how AI, agentic AI, agent-to-agent transactions are taking place. We're seeing lots of companies adopt the technology and at speed now. So there is a shift from obviously the human aspects, within a given process, and now an agent becoming the interaction point or the interface. So we now have to think differently around the security and how we protect data flows and interactions and authenticity, which is the ultimate problem here, between agent to human and agent to agent.
So it seems like you still kind of need that, like you said, governance layer for human oversight to not allow agents to make assessments and decisions autonomously yet.
So our AI architectures in Gen 5 now, we've been doing that for just over 6 years, and I'd say the biggest problem we've had with AI, it's exceptionally powerful. We've got it at relatively high levels of response, less so remediation. It does tend, depending on the type of vector or multi-vectors as they now are, does differentiate. but we need human oversight on every level. And you see increasing levels of inconsistency in the way that AI can respond. And the principal issue there is that AI doesn't understand state or status and consequence and also time, and it can't correlate those two elements together. So the human governance has to provide that contextual reasoning that needs to take place to understand, actually, is that, you know, a false positive? Is that a benign positive? Is that a true positive? To actually then ensure we have the highest levels of consistency. And the feedback loop goes around them to say, this is what we've identified. But AI, because it doesn't understand the consequential state, might take a different action. And you can document the action and say, I took this action for these reasons at this time. But again, we've got to come back to that when we do forensics, when we do investigations, and say, right, we've got to train this in a different way. That's why the feedback loop becomes so important from human governance, and make sure we don't deviate from that next time around.
Interesting. Seems like there's a lot of work to do, like, before we do get to that kind of autonomous state then. Is that something that you guys are working on at the moment in terms of model training, and what does that look like?
It absolutely is. It has been for a couple of years now. We've just started an amazing project with Queen's University Belfast, the cybersecurity information technology team there, the CSIT team, working together with them to very much take that to the next level, to truly understand how we train models more effectively. Okay, so one of the problems we're beginning to face is data distillation and diffusion and poisoning of data sources, and it takes a relatively small amount of data to create deviation in that consistency of an AI decision being made. If we add a cognitive layer to this, that's where this becomes super complicated, and you need human reasoning to be applied. So we need to create, you know, a new rule set, for want of a better description, and to simplify this, that actually says, look, we have to refer to these rules. These are the guardrails, these are the boundaries that we want the decision, you know, to operate within. And if we absolutely can't make that decision within those boundaries, then the human has to make those decisions, right? Because it has the contextual ability. Current levels of generative AI can't, because it's just reasoning with information points. It can't understand the broader context.
It's interesting. I spoke to somebody a little while ago and they were speaking about something similar, essentially putting in like a universal framework for boundaries for which AI models can operate in. So like you said in there, if you can keep it confined to work within those parameters, if it can reach a decision, great. If not, like you said, it needs to get some additional context from a human oversight.
Yeah, and it is, we're taking that sort of point of challenge, if you like. So why is attack vectors so readily adapting faster than defense, you know, protection layers? And the simple answer is you can diffuse the models so much faster than we can actually train defensive models. And then those models, when diffused, can also be transformed, what we call morphing, in attack. So literally you're evading the detection capabilities that we are trying to work through. And we're at this point, it's an inflection point for sure, which says, you know, we've moved from sort of Boolean approaches of, you know, if you see this, do this, and you take this route and this path, where the agentic defenses have to actually reason with it at an autonomous level and go, actually, all of these options may exist, and then the multiple path options as well, because the attack might be multiple layered, right? I'm trying to evade, I'm trying to mask, you know, my attack vector, because actually right and left hand, actually it's the left hand I need to be worried about, because the attack is, in this case, over there. And you're just looking at how AI is able to transform itself so quickly, so readily. Humans, by their nature, particularly when you're overwhelmed in a volume, this is why you see these fatigue-based attacks being so successful. Ultimately, it just takes one of those approvals and the attack vector can progress. And the speed of the attack progression is our next challenge, right? It is in harvesting a user's credentials, it's typically 15 seconds before they're used, and, you know, they're trying to progress the attack vector as that human. So yes, again, our response isn't that fast, that attack can progress.
Yeah, I read something the other day about malware basically altering its own code as it's being, I guess, pursued. So yeah, that's a whole new level of complexity.
Absolutely. And you go back to that sort of Boolean-based approach. If you do this, at that point, our automation actually requires human engagement. Now, if you scale that up on a volumetric approach, again, we are back to the human being the constraint at the defense, whereas obviously the attack can just scale through automation. So you can see where the nuances are really starting to stretch the boundaries of how we need to respond to this.
Wow. I want to ask you a little bit about certifications and those sorts of things. I know you guys are ISO 27001 certified, and a lot of businesses assume that because they're certified, they're secure, right? But in your own opinion, what would you say is the difference between just being certified and actually having a decent security culture and actually being resilient?
So firstly, right, ISO 27001 2022 and its latest guise is super important for organizations. Yes, there's other standards out there, Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus. There's a maturity curve to that. But ISO is the baseline standard. You would say an organization has a proven information security management system, and it has all of the elements based on industry best practice. It is not necessarily a point in time like a penetration test or an external attack surface management scan would be to an organization. If you just go back one question and you look at my explanation, perhaps poorly explained, but the explanation of how fast the attack vectors are changing, if we are only testing periodically, annually, for example, with a penetration test, then 364 days are going to lapse between it. Why did we take the certificate validity down to 90 days as a technology framework? And that's basically because there's so much time that can elapse between a certificate being known and obviously computational power being what it is now, and it's only going to increase with quantum, able to crack, even the most certificate algorithms and hash specification. So we've got to look at this. We've got to say, okay, so if you are going to implement ISO, fantastic. That's absolutely where most organizations should be focused right now. We've then got to amplify and add to that the continual testing, the continual improvements. It's not just patch management. It's not just understanding threat intelligence and how the threats to you, your business, your employees, your operations, your supply chains are all changing. It's understanding how you must change all of that together to continue the levels of protection that you want. If I see organizations all the time saying we've got an annual pen test, and I said, well, do you know how much of that test has actually changed since you last did it, whenever that was? And very few organizations can genuinely answer the question. And actually the genuine answer is, in most cases that I certainly see, it hasn't changed that much, and yet the landscape definitely has. So what are we testing against? And is that the right things to test against to solve the customer exposure and their greatest risks?
Interesting. Yeah, like you said, if you're just kind of looking at things from a point in time, there's so much that can change over those 364 days in a year. It actually kind of leads me on to what you guys do at CloudGuard. So a lot of SMBs try and, patch together their own kind of, their own SOC using enterprise tools, but they may not necessarily know exactly what they're doing. So at what point does that become more of a risk than an actual solution? And what would you say to somebody considering engaging with somebody like yourself that can provide a managed XDR service?
So I guess I'll break it down into three areas. The first is, listen, for any organization that is putting the emphasis on building their own SOC capability, that's a really good thing. Okay. Mm-hmm. So whether you choose to use a third party or you choose to do it yourself, the emphasis on taking security to the next level and doing that is the right thing. B, is to be supported. I think if you look at what we've learned from building SOCs over 5 generations of different companies now into just what we are now, solely focused on security in the SOC and CloudGuard, we've applied all of that learning in terms of bringing in the automation and the engineering team to support that. So yes, you can have a SOC a reactive, more responsive team that are going to respond to problems when they see them, when they're detected. The emphasis for us moves into the next area, which is that engineering team, that SOC automation team, is understanding what's taking place in a much broader spectrum, right? Multiple customer environments. And we're just more familiar with it, and we're dedicated to it. So a lot of security teams might not be dedicated. They might wear many hats in the organization. They might be doing patch management. They might be requested to do security audits and certificates, etc. Unless you've got sole focus on that, anything can come around the sides, can get through whilst you're not looking. So that's a reason you would use an outsourced provider. The 24-hour cover is another reason, and the global coverage, the expertise that we have because we're seeing these threats constantly. You might not see them constantly as an internal team. And just the emphasis of seeing repeated events in different environments and different customers, and it's the learning from it. So for example, when we see attack vectors from disparate sources, with a particular confidence tune scoring to come under an email detection threshold, actually that registers normally not just as malicious, but in the suspicious category. It might be allowed through in most customers, but that's how AI is being used to tune it, just to slide under that known detection capability. We can then look at the number of suspicious environments that we're seeing this in and correlate that, and actually then tune the rules for certain variables down in order to obviously identify where risks are starting to come through from how threat actors are behaving, if that makes sense. I think the greatest area is just the experience in responding as well. If you go to the third area, where we get involved in incident response in businesses that may not be customers, where we're called in and they may or may not have a SOC team, what you typically see is they may have an incident response plan, but what's occurred has fallen outside of what they've prepared or tested previously. And that's no disrespect to anybody. That's what's happening in the marketplace. It's having the people with the experience then at that point to contain and to focus on recovering a business, hopefully within 48 hours, but definitely as fast as possible.
I mean, a lot of security teams will be drowning in like alert fatigue. So in terms of like what you guys are providing there, where you have that 24/7 monitoring, you can, I guess, refine those boundaries of which will trigger an alert. What would you say is the kind of underestimated cost for a board that has a team that's just constantly getting pinged by alerts, false positives, and ultimately we know that then wanes on their attention, and that's when mistakes start to happen?
So what we've learned from and what we've tried to avoid within the CloudGuard configuration is our SOC capability is an equal size to our SOC automation and engineering team for a reason. And that reason is to avoid that alert fatigue, to avoid any scenario where the SOC operator doesn't have or is being overwhelmed simply by volumetrics or multiple customers. And that can occur in a lot of internal SOC teams, and you just don't find the opportunity. It's no fault of anybody to then start to automate. And obviously, as the problem amplifies, the opportunity becomes less and less. Where we've got to focus on in providing autonomous-based SOC services is just the number of integrations we're now having to monitor and understand the nuances between those disparate data points that are taking place. Agentic agents, agent-to-agent communications are occurring as we just see this mass acceleration of agentic AI capability. Understanding all of that requires huge amounts of focus. And as an internal SOC team, we have absolute focus on that. If you are, highly stressed and stretched and not automating, you are just firefighting in terms of the volumetrics, and anything can get through at that point. It's a human trait that is exploited by attackers. We know it is. And we know that, where they want to test it, they amplify, and they usually use distraction techniques like volumetrics, whether it's denial of service or, low probing in application and API exposures, vulnerability exposures, particularly where they're using automation to detect that. It might be no day, it might be 0 day, it might be known. but they all come after those at speed, literally minutes and hours now. How fast can we patch in comparison, to mitigate the risk? Probably not as fast now. So we need to apply, and that's more workload for the internal SOC team, isn't it, to be doing faster. And that's the ask.
Wow. I saw something recently where you had a conversation with somebody from the BBC about a deepfake that you created. Again, that's very unsettling because I watched it. I saw the likeness between yourself and what you created. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, and then also some advice for how we can kind of, train ourselves to look for these kind of things? Because, it's obviously probably an emerging trend for deepfakes, both visual, audio. So if we usually use, our visual cue and audio cues for authentication, where do we go from here if that can actually be faked?
I was really disappointed that the team didn't actually make me better. The reality of it all, the technology, the ability to craft really highly accurate, particularly audio at the minute. Video is not far behind in its accuracy. It is a really big challenging point for lots of businesses, and it comes back to us thinking differently about data tagging, data authenticity, right? How are we going to prove the origination of the source in any communications, and once it starts amplifying across any number of platforms, how difficult is it for us as a recipient to then know whether that is true or not? And that's how we need to modify the mindset, just as we have done with zero trust. When we create these deep fakes, it is still surprising even to me, 2 years on from using this technology, how fast it is evolving and how simple it now is to use at such low cost, right? So this is going to be a big problem, a much bigger problem than it already is. But it is coming back to how do we use the problem, now we've defined it, to then understand how we respond to it, right? And getting this message in organizations, which, data classification is not new. Right? Data authentication is newer, right? But we know that we need to prove the origins of data. Simple human traits, like as we do with the deepfake and we did with the BBC, just interjecting and asking a question that potentially derails the conversation, but only me and you would know in conversation, immediately tests the authenticity of the conversation that we're having, right? We would know that, only we would be able to answer that. Organizations have key phrases, key words, etc. Don't be offended when we all start using these social techniques to understand whether technology is genuine or not.
Wow. I mean, I heard something a few months ago actually about the kind of make-believe ransom scenarios where people would ring up elderly people impersonating their grandchildren or their children and essentially say, hey, look, I'm in trouble. I need X amount of money being sent to this account, or, whatever the kind of demands are. And the guidance around that was to have safe words. So safe words that you and your family know. So if you get this kind of, extortion call, you can drop your keyword in, your safe word in there. And if they can't respond with it, then it's fake. Or, if they are really distressed, they may actually forget it. So, there's no real 100% accurate way to kind of resolve this, but you can do the best you can.
So this is a true story, right? I had a conversation late last year with somebody at a charity event that we were helping to support, and they were saying, within some of the calls that they were receiving, this was becoming a really big problem. And I said, I cannot emphasize enough that you need to reinforce the use of safe words within families. And I actually saw them at a follow-up event on a Teams call, and at the end of it, we just had 5 minutes just chatting through a number of things, and I just said, can I just inquire as to what, and he said, you would not believe the reduction in calls already. He said, because we've made this absolutely mandated, in terms of this is the advice and guidance. And he said, the number of people that have come back and gone, the phone goes dead, the call ends as soon as I challenge. Right? And I said, it's the simplest things, right? I'm not going to necessarily say that in public, but it's the simplest questions. Favorite foods, favorite sports, favorite places, You know, whatever it might be, you create the narrative so it becomes memorable, you know, and particularly for people that are, you know, struggling with memory, etc. But those things are embedded, you know, within families and absolutely, you know, are critical to, you know, a protection layer that we don't have at the moment.
Wow. It's funny because, like, you know, usually people kind of harp on about, you know, password management, password security and stuff like that. But this is a whole new attack vector where, you know, passwords are not necessarily required. So yeah, so much to think about, and addressing these issues at the, I guess, the grassroots. So in your home and your families can only then bring the same sort of culture to your workplace, your work environment, to ultimately encourage good behavior with the access to systems that people may have during work.
Yeah, whatever our background, whatever our technical level of confidence, right? I've targeted a lot myself, okay? And some of them are really, really heavily researched and curated. I'm quite impressed by some of the accuracy that they have. And they know so much about you, that your shopping habits and your financial background, etc. And it's just pausing and building in that period of time to truly question, even if you suddenly actually are taken in by it, right? And that's human nature, right? It's curiosity. And it's the absolute trust we have embedded in all of us to sit here and have a communication and just engage, and also to help one another as well. And, you know, in talking to the charity and in talking to all of the people that handle these calls, that's exactly what I emphasized. It's just like, at that point, you just need to help people understand that is a technique they can use. Right, that's as far as you need to take it, but that is enough. And then you just, if you're talking to the person again for whatever reason, you can just ask them, right, was it helpful, right? You're not asking any more information, any personal information, anything like that, but it's giving people the tools and asking them just to pause and use those tools to validate what they're being asked to do.
Yeah, that's definitely a very good takeaway for people to apply. I saw something else recently, which was how AI summaries for mailboxes is actually starting to be leveraged by attackers. So they'll have like a prompt written in white text on a white background, which will say something like, I can't think of an example, but they'll basically nest the prompt into the text of the email body, so the human eye can't see it. The AI summary's picked it up because it's in white text, and now they're being asked to do something which wasn't actually something that was in the main body of the email. So again, just leveraging AI against us. You know, if we're using the summary because it's convenient, but if we don't actually then go ahead and sense check that, like, did my CEO really ask me to go to the Apple store and buy a load of iTunes vouchers and, you know, send them to this person? Unlikely. So,
well, it's certainly unlikely in CloudGuard, because I'd never say that. But I think, you know, where 5 years ago, you know, we were just seeing nuances in letter changes and domain names, right, to try and spoof. 3 years ago, it's been around a long time, a lot longer than that, we were seeing people add macros and mailbox rules, you know, to get in, and 30 days, up to 30 days later, all of a sudden activity takes place which you can't account for, and suddenly you realize this mailbox rules come into existence. Today, as you say, we've got, you know, masqueraded prompts within text that's just the same color as, I mean, you're taking a bet that somebody hasn't changed their background colors and what have you. Needless to say, most people, you know, it's obscured and it's very difficult to see, but suddenly you don't realize that the automation literally has already applied to that, taken that into account, and it's embedded in how it's responding. The hardest thing for us with Moltbot or OpenClaw is that it mimics user behavior as the user. So is that normal? Isn't it normal? Is it out of band, out of threshold of what we would expect? It's so difficult to see, and that's where these attack vectors are now going, where it's much, much harder to detect the nuances between what may or may not be suspicious, and that's what we've got to be focused on from a defense point of view.
Again, yeah, very, very, very insightful. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about Ansel. It seems to be like the golden child of what you guys have been creating at CloudGuard. So, yeah, keen to know a little bit more about that.
When me and Jav, I guess, founded the business, and we were blessed with huge amounts of experience before, and what we were seeing was this cyber burnout taking place even 10 years ago, with our teams working on that. And we said, look, we've got to be such, I guess, learning from this and such a sort of game-changing view as to how we approach solving this problem. We were seeing analysts, first and second line, doing 8 to 10 incidents a minute, but as they became more sophisticated and more difficult to determine, it takes longer, naturally, as a human being. And we thought, well, this isn't going to scale out if the attack vectors are automated, and they definitely appear to be going that way. Absolutely are today. So that's where Ansel's origination came from, and we did multiple iterations of Ansel before we actually got to something that did start to work. Today, Ansel's tested to can go way beyond it. We know this, 18,500 incidents a second in terms of performance, which outstrips any human. It's the consistency, it's the ability to auto-learn, it's the ability, for Ansel to then do investigation and triage and response. Ansel can now go all the way through to remediation and even embedding lessons learning and auto-tune and proactive threat hunting. So we've built a capability engine which we can now continually improve in many areas and add to it. But it's taken 6 years, and it's taken an awful lot of much brighter people than me in order for us to bring this to life, right? And this is the very beginning of the journey. This is what we're so, as Jav would say, gassed about. I'm too old to use trendy words like that. But that, for me, is absolutely what we set out to achieve, and we are beginning, and we're at the beginning of the journey, achieve with Ansel. It's being complementary. It's got human governance throughout it. It always will have. Ansel for us is, at the core of the business in driving that, in all of our operations, and, learning between human and Ansel and human. And it's the human interaction that is the next layer of that in terms of cognitive thought and understanding, I guess, more about those interactions. That's super exciting for us.
Nice. I mean, you said there that this is the beginning of your journey, but you guys have come so far over the last six or so years.
Yeah.
So what does the future look like for CloudGuard? And I heard an impressive stat the other day, which is you've got, is it 100% retention?
Yeah.
100% retention. So when people join you guys, they don't leave. So what's the plan for the future, and where do you plan on taking them and new customers?
Yeah, I mean, we're accepting that, we work with universities. We have done in Manchester Metropolitan. We are with Queen's University now. Obviously, we've expanded to Belfast and Northern Ireland and beyond. So yeah, we will continue that expansion. We will continue to work with amazing people that want to also contribute to this journey that we are on. And that's super exciting for us. The culture of the business, the Guardian culture in our universities, we refer to it, is something we want people to contribute to, be part of. It isn't about scaling this out and having, those kind of perhaps more traditional type of business metrics for us. It's the customer experience. It's how we're solving those customer problems, how we're responding to those changing. And they are changing rapidly in the landscape. As I say, verticalization is something we did a couple of years ago. Very glad that we did it, very important that we did it, and therefore the business continues to build both subject matter experts and to look at new areas in which threats are evolving and how we can help and learn from customers and protect more customers.
Perfect. Well, Matt, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Ruben. Pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.